on here on Classic Country, AM 1450 here on this Tuesday. Fast approaching the Thanksgiving holiday weekend, and now time to take a look at Virginia sports. With Chris Graham of the Augusta Free Press, we are also fast approaching, Chris, the big game coming up on Saturday. UVA, Virginia Tech, latest line I saw had the Hokies favored by about 24 points over the Cavaliers.
Not surprising. That the Virginia Tech team has won 9 straight games since that loss to JMU. They're just about ready to finish a perfect regular season in the ACC. The Cavs are reeling after that win over Miami back on October 30th. They've lost 3 straight in really frustrating ways. They've had leads late in the games against Boston College last weekend, Maryland, and also Duke, and just couldn't seal the deal. And I think the writing is on the wall as far as this goes. The Cavs are kind of hobbling in there with some injuries. Keith Payne's been down. Rossai Dowling is down for the season, a couple of their best players. So, yeah, a bloodletting seems to be in order on Saturday down in Blacksburg. The Hokies seem to just be warming up for the ACC championship game, and the Cavs are getting ready for 2011.
How do you size up the Hokies right now? Obviously, we're still a couple weeks away from that ACC championship game, and right now it looks like it could be, Florida State or perhaps NC State facing the Hokies.
Yeah, NC State has their fate in their hands, actually. NC State, with their head-to-head win over Florida State a few weeks ago, with a win over Maryland this weekend, would be the team to represent the Atlantic Division against Virginia Tech, and that would be an interesting game. The Hokies won the first matchup in Raleigh. 41-30 was the final, but the Hokies had to score a late touchdown to take a lead, and then they got an interception return for a touchdown that sealed it. So that's the sort of the skinny there is they played a close game back in early in the season, and it'd be interesting to see Virginia Tech and Florida State match up. These two teams did not play in the regular season, and so we wouldn't know how that one would go quite as well. And I think either way, it's going to be a tough matchup for the Hokies. The Hokies, have a couple of teams there that would be very hungry for a BCS berth. It'd be the first time in a long time for NC State. I'm not sure actually if NC State's had a BCS berth since the BCS system started back in the late 90s, and certainly for Florida State, they were a regular in the BCS for a while, but they haven't been there for a while either. So I think both matchups could be tough. Florida State and the speed they present on defense could be an interesting issue for Virginia Tech, though Virginia Tech's size could be a key there if they can get their running game going early. We know how the NC State game might go. The NC State game would be another kind of boxing match, and it would just be a matter of who would win in the late rounds. But first things first, NC State has to beat Maryland, and we'll see what happens from there.
Now, of course, we also have a few other games involving ACC schools. Georgia Tech. We've got Florida State. We've got South Carolina, Clemson. We also have a ACC matchup in North Carolina and Duke. Right now, at this point, how do you size up the ACC as far as maybe the teams will be advancing to a ball game?
Well, we know that the Florida State is likely going to be the team, I think. I mean, I look at the Maryland game with NC State, and I think that NC State's going to win that game. Florida State's going to be playing probably, we have to figure, in the Gator Bowl. Maybe that puts Maryland into the the Chick-fil-A Bowl. It used to be the Peach Bowl. From there, teams will fall in. Carolina's going to be a team that'll be in that mix, and looking through the standings, certainly Miami's going to get a lower tier bowl. Georgia Tech at 6-5. You look at Georgia Tech and Carolina both at 6-5. They're going to be there. Miami at 7-4 is going to get one of those games. You don't really see a lot of teams there that are going to make a lot of noise in the postseason, except for Virginia Tech and maybe Florida State and NC State. Maryland at 7-4. Win this weekend, of course, will put them at 8-4. They could insert themselves into the mix for one of those upper tier bowls, but.
Yeah, wouldn't that be something if Maryland won and NC State obviously fell, and Maryland got into the championship game and beat the Hokies and wound up in a BCS game?
Well, actually, Maryland can't do that now. Maryland, with their loss to Florida State, but now the thing about Maryland is, they had a good enough season this year that they saved Ralph Fridge's job. Ralph Fridge, before the season, was definitely on the hot seat, so much that if Maryland could have bought him out at the end of last season, they would have. They just weren't able to get the money together to buy out his contract. His contract had a big buyout clause in it. They would have been able to do that after this season. After this season had gone through, the buyout would have gone down significantly, and Maryland was ready to move on. But that 7-4 season by Maryland keeps the Fridge there in Maryland for another season, and with a freshman quarterback in Danny O'Brien who looks pretty good, that could be a blessing in disguise for Maryland fans that their team did as well as they did this season. But, NC State, a good comeback season for them. This is Tom O'Brien's 4th year. We had a lot of 4th-year coaches this year in the ACC. And Tom O'Brien had left Boston College pretty famously a few years ago, leaving one ACC school for another. He had really not done a lot at NC State. And this season, I think there were a lot of I'd say expectations, but also a lot of pressure on him. If they had had another subpar season, we could have been looking at the end of the Obi era down in Raleigh next year. But 8-3 record and a chance still to get in that ACC championship game, a good comeback year for them. Florida State, all the controversy over Bobby Bowden his last few years, and finally his exit after last season. Where was that program going to go? They're 6-2 in the ACC, 8-3 overall. That big game with Florida, they're right back in the mix. So yeah, there's not a lot to crow about as far as the ACC goes in the national picture. Certainly with Virginia Tech stumbling early in the season, but there's definitely some storylines. And Miami's on the other side of that. Randy Shannon, I think that loss at home to Virginia Tech last weekend really cements his future. The 7-4.
Would you say at this point, Chris, that the most positive surprise of 2010 of the ACC has been Maryland, and the biggest disappointment might be Miami?
I think you're exactly right there. Yeah, the biggest surprise, Maryland, with a close second being NC State, but Miami definitely being the biggest disappointment, certainly for Miami fans and maybe for the ACC. This looked like the year Randy Shannon in his fourth year down at Miami, being the year that they would turn things around. They had I think they were number 12 in the preseason rankings. They had that big game with Ohio State early that they didn't do well in. They lost to Virginia. They got blown out by Florida State. They lost that game to Virginia Tech last weekend. I think a win over Virginia Tech, even if they don't get in the ACC title game, if that had happened, which was likely the case because Virginia Tech was not going to stumble against Virginia this weekend, I still think a 6-2 record by Miami and a win in that game would have given Miami officials hope. Hey, there's something to build on for next year. But you lose to your big rival 45-17 as they did to Florida State. They got really beat down by Ohio State. They lose that game to Virginia Tech. I think that at Miami they don't play a lot of football. They don't do all the stuff they do to go 7-4, go 5-3 in the ACC and playing lower tier bowls every year. I really think that the future is going to be with another coach there. I think that the next coach is going to have a great talent base. Shannon's recruited very, very well. That's part of the disappointment, though. He's recruited so well, and he's having these subpar seasons for Miami. So yeah, Miami the biggest disappointment by far in the ACC. Maybe Duke a close second. Duke came into the season.
I was thinking North Carolina, Clemson, and Georgia Tech to a certain degree too.
Yeah, Carolina, I hold off on calling them a big disappointment because, they had all the off-the-field issues this year. They came in, certainly, before the season, if they were at full strength, they were top 15 in the country, and a 6-5 record would definitely have been a huge disappointment. This is Butch Davis's fourth season down in Chapel Hill. But with all those off-the-field issues, which you can't say weren't, caused in part by the administration of the football program there, Butch Davis being the head of that. But, they've dealt with a lot this year. They're 6-5 overall. Nothing to give an excuse to that team for. Clemson at 6-5, they lost a lot last year. They lost C.J. Spiller and they lost some other guys from that team. They had a lot of talent, kind of, a depletion there. Wake Forest is also something. I don't know about a disappointment, but head scratcher. Wake Forest.
Yeah, I haven't seen the total points, but I mean that Wake Forest defense, they've been abysmal.
They're 2-9 overall, 1-7 in the ACC. I know Virginia people are scratching their heads. Hey, yeah, because we didn't get them on our schedule. Everybody else was beating their heads in for them, but they did get the win over Duke to start the season, and then they've fallen down. Yeah, their defense has been horrid. Their offense has moved the ball. They've been, I don't know that we expected that they would have a good season this year, but I don't know that we also expected that, Jim Grove had this program in a BCS game a few years ago, and they're back. They're as bad as Wake Forest has ever been, and it's really surprising to see that. Duke is 3-8. They lost to Wake Forest early in the season, but I think I expected more out of David Cutcliffe. He had a chance at the Tennessee job last year when that job came open, and he turned it down because he thought he was moving things in the right direction at Duke. They've got the one win over Virginia in a wild game, a loss to Wake Forest in a wild game, and then a bunch of blowout losses. And it's really hard to figure that, of course, in one respect, it's not hard to figure. The only person who's been able to win at Duke in the last 30 years is Steve Spurrier. But that not said, I still think that Duke, I had more expectations that Duke might win 5 or 6 games this year, and they're sitting at 3 right now. So yeah, that I guess that's our report card for the ACC this year. Some teams that didn't achieve, and some teams that really did achieve this year.
And then 1AA, obviously JMU, disappointing season. They were able to win last weekend to finish their season 6-5, but they're not going to the playoffs. Coastal Carolina gets the Big South tiebreaker, and a lot of Liberty fans, 8-3. They beat Ball State, a Division I program, and yet they're not going to go. Coastal Carolina at 6-5, they get in. Liberty 8-3, they don't get in.
Well, they get in because of the tiebreaker in the conference, and that's part of that. So that's just the way that goes. A 3-way tie at the top, and then the points allowed is the big key there. And Coastal finished up strong, to say the least, 70-3 win over the weekend. But Liberty, I think maybe the key for them, of course, was losing the game to Coastal, but another key could have been that loss of JMU. Now, if JMU is the JMU team that beat them, the team that had just come off the win against Virginia Tech and the team that we all expected to be not just a playoff team, but, a top seed maybe in the 1AA playoff field at that time, then maybe that loss to JMU is a close loss 10-3 at Bridgeforth is sort of a badge of honor for Liberty, maybe something in their resume. They say, hey, this is proof that we're among the nation's elite. JMU also not making the playoffs, that kind of hurts them as well. So I think that could be another factor there that fans have to look at. And certainly, yeah, the tiebreaker process is what it is. The biggest thing that Liberty could have done was to simply beat Coastal in the field, and then there wouldn't be any discussion about this.
How about the high school situation, too? I know we don't have any Augusta County, Rockbridge County teams in there, but we've got a couple of big ball games coming up this weekend. First of all, the WREL ranks regional championship, Amherst and Harrisonburg. Interesting matchup there. A little to the east, we've got Brookville and Liberty, Division 3, and then also in Division 1 of Group A in Region B, another interesting matchup for regional championship game, Alta Vista and Riverheads.
Yeah, Riverheads, I was going to say, you said no teams from Augusta County. Riverheads is still moving the ball up and down the field like they always do. They had 4,000 yards rushing in the regular season, and they continued that in their first game of the playoffs. They ran the ball up and down the field against Amelia. They seem to be, this is a team that people have been saying since before the season started that if they stay healthy, they're going to be there, and they're still churning the ball up and down the field, and they put so much pressure on opposing offenses. Of course, we know they put them on opposing defenses because they move the ball so well, but it's almost a given that Riverhead is going to score, 28 points, 35, 40, maybe 50 points, depending on how things go on the turnover situation. They're going to score a lot of points, and so what it tells the other offense is, hey, we can't afford to punt the ball. Riverhead's only had some stat they had single figures in punts this year. They consistently score or get in scoring position, and if you're the other offense, you've got to do the same thing. And if you get down a score, you just know you get down a score, and Riverhead gets the ball, the game might be over. So they're a really tough team to play in that mindset because it can really mess with your team's psyche as far as that goes. That Amherst Harrisonburg game you mentioned as well, very interesting game there. Harrisonburg obviously ending the regular season undefeated against an Amherst team that has been consistently just a top level team for the last few years. That could be a clash of titans in that one right there.
Hey, Chris, lastly, college basketball. JMU got a big one yesterday, I think, over Princeton by 1 point. VMI is undefeated. They got Southern Virginia coming up tonight, and then a trip to West Virginia on Saturday, I believe, after Thanksgiving. And, of course, UVA making that West Coast road trip and getting hammered again last night by Washington, losing that ball game, let's see, by 43 points, I think it was.
Yeah, 24-point lead at halftime for Washington. Washington made 8 of 9 three-pointers in the first half. Ended with 17 overall. Stanford also beat Virginia by 20. It's a young team for the Cavs, and they're going to struggle early in the season. They're playing a tough schedule. Tony Bennett didn't shy away from giving his team a really tough schedule. They have Oklahoma today in the Maui Classic. It won't get any easier for the Cavs, but, I guess his approach is you're not going to get better playing against a bunch of teams you're supposed to beat by 20 points. Go out there and play some tough games and maybe raise your level of opposition. JMU got a huge win. That was, a win over Princeton. Everybody knows what the Princeton brand name means in basketball, and to beat Princeton is a huge deal, and that's a big step for that program. And Denzel Bowles had a monster game. I think it was 29 points in the game, and just seemed to, be scoring at will in the second half of that game. So JMU, yeah, that's a signature win for that program. And I think Matt Brady, I've thought this about him since he first got the job. He's going to turn that program around, and I think you're starting to see some evidence of that JMU basketball is on the map. Certainly they get attention of the country when they beat Princeton. When people see that score scrolling across the bottom of their screen when they're watching other sports and they see that Princeton lost to JMU, they're going to start finding out who JMU is here in the CAA. I think this year. I think JMU is going to do well this year.
Of course, Chris, we won't have a show on Friday, so want to say to you and your wife, happy Thanksgiving. We won't have a show on Friday, but we do appreciate all your time talking sports here on this Tuesday. What do we look for? News and sports in the coming days for both the Augusta Free Press and Virginia Sports Online.
Well, we look forward to the big Virginia Tech football game this weekend. We'll have some previews of that, some press conference notes and transcripts and other stuff getting us ready for that big game. And kind of an easy week maybe this week as far as the news goes. We'll actually be out. There's a turkey trot at the Waynesboro YMCA on Thursday, and we're going to be out there chronicling that in great detail. Good little health and fitness aspect on Thanksgiving. So some sports and some fun this week, and we'll get back to the serious stuff next week.
That was great. Chris Graham once again with the Augusta Free Press and Virginia Sports Online. And we'll come back for more of the show here on this Tuesday right after this.